Tenerife was the worst aviation accident ever. This one would have been the third worst. What happened in the extremely close call at the Nice airport in September? Let's go over the BEA's prelim report on taking off. Hi, I'm Dan Milliken. I'm still fighting through this cold, so please forgive the voice. We'll get through this. We're going to look at the preliminary report from the French investigative organization, the BEA, when two fully loaded Airbus A320s nearly collided at the Nice airport in southern France. 10 feet. That was all that separated what could have been a huge tragedy. Only behind Tenerife and Japan Airlines 123 in 1985. So what went wrong here? Why did this happen? And finally, we're going to go over important takeaways to avoid this very thing happening in the future. And first, let's clear up what was at stake. Early media stories were alarming people with inaccurate reports that there could have been 300 people on each aircraft, making it worse than Tenerife. But both aircraft in this incident were two Airbus A320s, equivalent to a 737. You can't carry 300 people on board each one of those planes. In this situation, there were 358 total passengers and crew between the two aircraft, which still would have been horrendous. Back in the early 2000s, I actually flew into Nice on my way to the Cannes film market where we had a movie up for distribution. It's a very ritzy place, and we'll see how that became a factor in the event as well. Also, one note for terminology we're going to use. For all the American viewers, in the U.S., us pilots, we call runway 4, runway 4. Outside the U.S., a single-digit runway will have the 0, so it's runway 04. Since this event occurred in France, we'll be calling it runway 04. All right, let's start off with a recap of what happened to lead two aircraft to be just 10 feet away from each other on a runway, beginning with the aircraft that almost landed on top of the other. Call sign, Nouvelair 586, an Airbus A320 registered as TS-INP, took off from Tunisia Carthage Airport around 8:15 local time in Tunisia and was headed to the Nice Côte d'Azur Airport. Looking ahead to the destination, the crew gathered the weather information from the Automatic Terminal Information Service called the ATIS as part of their approach preparation. It stated at 8:12 p.m. that runway 04 left for landing and runway 04 right for takeoff. The approach being used was the RMP Zulu 04 left. Wind was 080 at 15 knots, visibility 10 kilometers, scattered clouds at 1,600 feet, broken clouds at 9,000 and 14,000 feet. The temperature was 24 degrees Celsius. For those less familiar with aviation, let me translate. At Nice, there are two runways which are parallel. They're a bit closer together than many parallel runways, but it does allow for one runway to serve as the departure runway and the other for arrivals. Now, there's not really a written standard set in stone, but many airports running parallel operations use the outer runway for arrivals. But here at Nice, it's the slightly shorter inside runway 04 left that's used for landing aircraft. And why? Because takeoffs are the noisiest part of airplane operations, and the ritzy French Riviera people want the airplanes turning out to sea as quick as possible to keep that noise pollution out from their homes. The wind is blowing nearly east at 15 knots, or about 17, 18 miles an hour, with 10 kilometers of visibility, as we said. But keep in mind, it was dark at the time of the incident. At around 1,600 feet, there was those scattered clouds, with coverage being about 3/8 to 4/8, or half of the sky. And between 9,000 to 14,000 feet, the cloud coverage increases between 5/8 and 7/8 of the sky. We call that a ceiling. The entire day had periods of scattered clouds, broken clouds, and especially moments of partial sun before 8 p.m. And this sounds like okay weather, but soon the weather would become a factor that changed the crew's plans before their arrival. 55 minutes after departure, the crew made first contact with the Nice Tower approach controller to report their descent to flight level 150 or 15,000 feet. The controller further cleared them to 4,000 feet. And just a quick but important note here before we continue, the Nice Air Traffic Control had 4 personnel working at the tower that evening with 1 person on break. The Nice air traffic system managed the workload by having 2 of the controllers carry out 2 position duties instead of 1. The evening of the incident, there were 2 people doing the jobs that 4 people might normally be assigned to, but I want to stress this is normal ATC procedure when traffic is lighter. It is not uncommon for ATC to combine positions. And I mention this because the report brings it up, and it may be one more small hole in the Swiss cheese model. The ramp position, which provides control clearances to aircraft on the ramp, the ground position, providing control and information services, were combined and managed by 1 person. In the same way, the tower position, which manages aircraft taking off, landing, all that, and the approach position, which manages the aircraft in the airspace just outside the airport to guide them to where the tower can take over for the landing, were combined into 1 as well. A supervisor was present with these 2 controllers, and the 4th controller was taking a break during the time of the incident. All 4 staff were very experienced, with the least experienced controller being the one that was on break. The ramp ground controller had 13 years, the tower approach controller had 25 years, and the controller on break 12 years, and the supervisor had 28 years of experience. Often in the States, airports with less traffic will combine these positions. As I said, it's possible to manage multiple positions, but it does increase the risk of incidents if a controller misses something. Usually, training in dual roles will help the controller be more prepared to manage the load. Now, back to the flights. Between 9:10 and 9:19, the crew spotted cloud masses on their weather radar and obtained clearance to modify their heading. You see, there was a thunderstorm SIGMET, or significant meteorological information for that area. By 9:19, a red zone had appeared on their weather radar around the intermediate fix, or IF, of the RMP Zulu 4 left approach, and asked for a direct route to the Beesbo fix, which was the IF of the RMP Alpha 04 left approach. Okay, to decode this for non-pilots. The approach that evening into the airport was the RMP Zulu for 04 left. You'll see it on this chart. It's more of a straight in over that little finger of land. It begins with the fix Limpu back here. But the plane was picking up heavy precipitation near Limpu, so they asked to go to the intermediate fix for RMP Alpha instead. And when you look at that plate, it curves in there to avoid overflying the people on that little finger of land. And it was at this point that the crew opted for the RMP Alpha approach to runway 04 left. To avoid weather, this was not a bad call for the flight crew of the inbound Nouvelair A320. Tower cleared the route, and the crew confirmed their decision to do the RMP Alpha 4 left approach. And to cement the good call here, the 2 preceding aircraft landing at Nice also used the same approach to avoid the weather. Tunis Air landing at 9:21 and Lufthansa at 9:27. EasyJet Airbus A320 registered as OEIJZ with call sign Alpine 109 Echo. Scheduled to head to Nantes, a city located in northwestern region of France. EasyJet contacted the ramp ground controller and were cleared to start up. At 9:21, 2 minutes later, Tower asked the Nouvelair crew for confirmation for the RMP Alpha 4 left approach, and they confirmed. Tower cleared them to 3,000 to Bisbo, the starting point for the approach. The Nouvelair crew observed that the Promenade des Anglais was visible, and they began their approach checklist. At 9:22 on the ground, the ramp ground controller cleared the EasyJet to taxi, hold short of runway 04 left at holding point Alpha 1. The EasyJet crew read back correctly and taxied towards that point, while remarking the poor visibility on the ground to the controller. At 9:25, the tower controller cleared Nouvelair to start the RNP Alpha approach to runway 04 left after Bispo, of which crew read back correctly. Simultaneously, the ramp ground controller reminded the EasyJet crew to hold at holding point Alpha 1 and requested them to switch to the tower frequency. After making contact with tower, the EasyJet was cleared to cross runway 04 left and follow taxiway Whiskey to Whiskey 3. The jet verified that no planes were approaching and they crossed. By 9:27, tower cleared the EasyJet to line up on runway 404 right and hold, but the crew requested to wait at the holding point Whiskey 3 because the cabin wasn't ready yet, and tower approved. The next minute, Nouvelair passed the final approach fix, FN04A, and the autopilot was set to final approach mode. And again, I want to stress, this one is a little more trickier than normal. On the final approach fix, often you're configured for landing with a straight shot into the runway, but for this procedure, you're not lined up for the final. You still fly further before turning into the airport. 9:30. The tower cleared Nouvelair to land on runway 04 left and receive the correct readback. The Airbus passed the next point, MN04A, at 2,000 feet with the heading of 357, and the pilot flying turned off the autopilot. The plane turned from a heading of 360 to 040 and reported having a visual of the runway. Now this is the point where the pilots on the Nouvelair Airbus started to shift and lock onto the wrong target runway. And as you can see from the prelims picture of what they might have seen, runway 04 left was certainly harder to discern than 04 right. At 9:30, Nouvelair's automatic radio altimeter called out 1,000. While continuing a right turn 3.4 nautical miles from the threshold of 04 right. Within moments of that, EasyJet called tower that they were ready for departure, and they were asked to line up on runway 04 right and to hold. 30 seconds later, the Nouvelair descended through 560 feet. The pilot flying asked the pilot monitoring to replace the flight director with the flight path vector, the bird, on the primary flight display. Within 10 seconds, Nouvelair aligned with the axis of runway 04 right, just 527 feet above the ground, still 1.8 nautical miles from the threshold of 04 right. Within 9 seconds, the ASMIGs, that's the Advanced Surface Movement Guidance and Control System, activated in the tower and gave the first level amber alert for a runway incursion as the EasyJet entered the runway. 16 seconds later, the ASMIGs blared an aural warning and red visual to the controller, which was the second alert level. At this point, the Nouvelair was 1 nautical mile from the threshold of 04 right, and several things happened. The EasyJet was turning left to align with the center line when the pilot monitoring noticed the Nouvelair, and the BEA wrote that he expressed his surprise at the perceived flight path, and both crew members did not identify a conflict. The tower, hearing the alarm, called Nouvelair to confirm runway 04 left. They replied, Nouvelair 586, I confirm 04 left, and added short final for 04 left. And tower said, cleared to land 04 left. I don't know what it looks like from the Nice tower. Usually they would be on binoculars. Maybe the angle doesn't show very clearly which runway an incoming plane is coming in on. But with the ASMIGs blaring, I'm surprised just a radio confirmation was all the tower controller needed. In the cockpit, height callouts continued 150, 40, 30. At exactly 9:32 and 23 seconds, the EasyJet crew and passengers felt an intense rumble and loud roar over the plane, and that was because the Nouvelair flew just 10 feet over the EasyJet, which was still stopped at the center line of runway 04 right. Nouvelair's radio altimeter value went from 39 feet to 10 feet in 1 second before jumping back to 24 feet the next second. 2 seconds after the flyover, tower asked the crew to perform a go-around, and the crew carried out a missed approach. According to the BEA, the landing gear never touched the runway. It's very possible the pilots had already initiated go-around before the tower called for it. The EasyJet crew requested to return to the apron while the Nouvelair were vectored to join the approach procedure again. And at 9:48, the Nouvelair landed, this time on the correct runway, 04 left. It was reported that the EasyJet pilot left the aircraft distressed, and the flight to Nantes was canceled. And I don't blame the flight crew to have been shaken. They were 10 feet away from a very fiery death. Okay, that was the story of what happened leading to the incursion. But before moving on, I want to note that the BEA did not make too many remarks about the weather and exactly what conditions were present when the incursions occurred. The report does mention that the weather was unsettled between Cannes and Antibes, and that visibility sensors recorded visibility greater than 10 kilometers until 9:30, when it decreased to 2,800 meters at 9:34. Also, moderate showers appeared between 9:30 and 9:40, and there was a slight disturbance caused by cumuliform clouds. And remember, the EasyJet crew made a remark about the deteriorating ground conditions, yet the METAR data does not seem to accurately reflect what they said in this report. And sometimes this can occur because weather can be different on the runway than where the tower, the METAR system, is located. It's like how you could be driving in clear conditions and suddenly drive into a wall of fog. Also remember that the Nouvelair flight crew noticed a segment becoming active for the Marseille FIR warning of frequent thunderstorms with tops going to flight level 420, 42,000 feet. It's possible that the weather deteriorated while the plane was descending, but we don't have information in this report to confirm any of that. For now, this remains a question to be answered during the final report, and it even looks like the BEA has the study of weather conditions listed at the top of the next steps for their investigation. So maybe we will find out if fog conditions could have been a factor affecting Nouvelair's ability to line up with the correct runway. Okay, what could have caused these pilots to aim for the wrong runway? 2 words: runway lighting. At the Nice airport, the 2 parallel runways have different lighting system setups. Runway 04 left, as I mentioned earlier, is used for landing. The runway itself is equipped with runway identification lights, RTIL, rather than approach lights, and has threshold, side, and center line lighting with Thorn halogen bulbs. Similarly, the takeoff runway 04 right has the threshold lights, side and center line lights, except they are all lit with LED bulbs, and more on this in a moment. Both 04 left and 04 right runways have PAPI lights on the right-hand side of the runway, yet they have slight differences too. For those who don't know what PAPI lights are, PAPI lights are short for Precision Approach Path Indicator. The PAPI light system is made up of 4 sets of lights with white and red set at varying angles to help pilots gauge their vertical slope inputs. The pilot should see 2 white, 2 red when descending at the correct slope, and if they see, say, 3 white lights and 1 red light, it means they're flying too high. If it's 3 red lights, they're too low. 4 white or 4 red, you're way too high or too low. The unique issue with the PAPI lights on 04 left is that the lights are spaced at a shorter distance of 4 meters apart instead of 9 meters, causing the viewing distance to decrease by half, like 7 kilometers from 15 kilometers, which is the visual range for 04 right's PAPI lights. Now, this is not to say that the lights can't be visible beyond 7 kilometers or even 15 kilometers, but often, if pilots are too far from the PAPI light range, the lights may look pink or at least not be clear on whether they're solid white or red. And once they're in range, it's very clear to distinguish the colors. Now, about the runway lights themselves, there are some elements that I find interesting here. As I mentioned earlier, the 04 left lights were lit with halogen bulbs and the 4 right with LEDs. According to the FAA, research generally indicates that the LED bulbs are brighter than halogens. Many airports have been replacing halogen bulbs with LEDs in favor of cost savings, longer lifespans, increased visibility, and energy efficiency. So it's unsurprising that this would be present at the Nice airport runway, but they hadn't changed out 04 left's bulbs, and the report doesn't share much more beyond that. What the report does mention was that at the time of the occurrence, the 04 left runway identification flashing lights, the RTIL, were illuminated. The brightness level was not recorded. The threshold lights, the wing bar lights, the runway in lights, the edge and center line lights, and the PAPI were eliminated at brightness level 1, the minimum brightness of their 4 levels available. Here's the interesting part. At the time of the occurrence, the 04 right runway end, edge, and center line lights were illuminated at brightness level 1, and the 04 right PAPI, threshold lights, wing bar lights, the threshold identification flashing lights, they were all extinguished. They turned off. Neither runway had construction or anomalies found during inspections. The bottom line, the lights on runway 04 left were dimmer than 04 right, and 04 right had their PAPIs off. With all this information about the runway lighting at Nice Airport, it's not surprising to read that the BEA wrote about its awareness of other incidents where pilots may have been confused about runway 04 left with runway 04 right. They are collecting and studying the cases, and so far, they have said that the initial elements seem to indicate that the perceived difference in brightness between the two runways could contribute to this type of confusion, you think? So even at the lowest brightness level, runway 04 right had a brighter runway, which was also confirmed by the BEA. I could see why the pilots may have visually confirmed seeing the runway just because it was the brighter runway. Still doesn't excuse them. The pilots have to pick the right runway. Even with this information about the lighting, there are a couple of questions that come to my mind. One is the PAPIs. Runway 04 right's PAPIs were extinguished. The less bright runway 04 left PAPIs were on and just to the right of runway 04 left. That's a pretty big sight picture difference, a clue that the flight crew missed. The CVR might give us some clues on what was going on in the cockpit at that time as well. Or is it possible that the approach itself just needs refining? It's also curious why the controllers didn't spot the mistake earlier when the ASMIG alarm went off warning of a potential incursion. The report states that it's a tool designed to supplement the air traffic controller's decisions, but controllers can ignore it. The tower did reach out to Nouvelair to confirm correct runway and took the crew's word for it that they were on the correct one. So I wonder what information will come out in each of these areas, and perhaps studying the weather may also provide answers to where and why things went wrong. In the meantime, has the Nice airport made any changes after this serious incident? Yes. The BEA wrote that a precautionary measure pending additional information was taken. Quote, VPT-type visual procedures are prohibited at night when in dedicated runway operations. Okay, basically what this means is that they can only have precision-only approaches when using dedicated runways. That means one for departure, one for arrivals. Now, if only a single runway is in use, they can do the visual approaches. Additionally, before the report came out, France's Transport Minister Philippe Tabarot announced that in the next 3 years, there would be development of 30 new air traffic controllers in the southeast region, including Nice Airport. He added that the Nice control tower would have biometric badges installed to observe staff presence in real time, pushing to guarantee performance of controllers. Well, that's a little big brother for me, but okay. The report does not implicate controllers as part of the cause of the incident, but hopefully these new additions benefit Nice Airport regardless. One further update not covered in the report is that a NOTAM has been put out on October 27th to December 18th announcing the closure of runway 04 left. The runway was reportedly closed for maintenance and rehabilitation work, and Nice Airport is now operating with just a single runway 04 right temporarily. Hopefully this means replacing the bulbs with LEDs so that both runways have the same lights. And that's what the BEA and the French aviation people have taken away. For me, I've taken away as a reminder that most crashes are a combination of things that line up. Links in the chain or in the often used holes in the Swiss cheese. There were a bunch of links in this chain that could have been broken, holes that could have been closed or moved. The ASMIGs alarm in the tower, the location of the PAPIs in the pilot's sight picture, the change to RNP Zulu from RNP Alpha, the pilot monitoring, noticing the incoming plane was lined up for runway 04 right but shrugging it off. It's a reminder to me that aviation and many other parts of life depend on paying attention to the warning signs around me. My takeaway is to not shrug off something, but to think it through. Take the time in my impatience to see if it's a link in the chain that needs to be broken. And that's our report. Thanks for watching, and thanks to our sponsors who make this happen, like Flying Eyes. These are the best glasses under headsets and helmets. Go to flyingeyesoptics.com/takingoff10 and get 10% off your order. I love my Flying Eyes. And if you haven't seen our recent report, please watch it right here. Remember, superior judgment trumps superior skill. Take care.